So we're going to start at Old Trafford, where Arsenal and Manchester United kind of picked up where they left off from last season. For Arteta, a 1-0 win from a set-piece goal, and for Amorim, another home defeat. Bayindir, the goalkeeper, took the blame, but Amorim had a pretty strong defence of his goalkeeper in his post-match press conference, didn't he, Rob? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, we were both in that room for the post-match news conference. I thought it got a little bit spiky and a little bit tense at different spells. I mean, Amorim really is often like quite tense in post-match news conferences anyway. I think he's just so kind of wired from the actual game, and he's been made to kind of come out and face his questions so quickly that he kind of doesn't really let his emotions or let go of his emotions before he's sat down in the chair. And it's actually one of the reasons why he doesn't do proper post-match debriefs with his players in the dressing room, because he just feels he's too emotional to do it and leaves it till the next day. Obviously, he can't do that with a press conference. He's got to do it. He was obviously frustrated with the result. The mistake has cost him the chance of any points at all on the opening day. Perhaps wasn't expecting so many questions about his goalkeeper. Obviously, he's walked in there expecting some questions about Bayindir because it's his mistake that's cost United the game. But I don't think that he was expecting so many questions down that line and questions about whether he should have picked Tom Heaton and why he dropped Andre Onana. I actually think he thought that his selection process was quite straightforward, that Andre Onana was not fit all the way through pre-season. He did return to training last week, but I'd only had 3 sessions with the team. Altay Bayindir had played most of the games in pre-season, 4, I think he'd started out of the 6, and was the natural replacement for Onana once he decided that Onana just wasn't ready to play against Arsenal. So while he was prepared to kind of defend Bayindir and maybe explain what he thought about Arsenal's goal, I don't think that he thought that he was going to have to answer so many questions about actually his selection, which obviously leads to the press conference that we saw and him getting a little bit tense, a little bit angry. There was only one question really in the press conference about United's progress and how he thought they'd played. I think he perhaps was expecting the line of questioning to be more about that and how well United had done, rather than this kind of one selection issue that he had at a goalkeeper and the mistake that led to Arsenal's win. So, yeah, I mean, positives for him, but again, you know, United have been beaten at home, and he's certainly not one to make a load of excuses and sort of say, no, we shouldn't be getting beat. He understands what happens when United get beaten at home, whoever the opposition is.
Mark, do you buy the argument that Onana couldn't have played that game? I mean, he was fit. He had. I mean, I know what Rob's saying, but he had trained, and he is clearly the best goalkeeper they have by some distance. Did Ruben Amorim make the wrong decision on Sunday?
He's the best goalkeeper by some distance. Well, I think United have got the worst 2 goalkeepers in the Premier League. I really do. I think you'll struggle to find a worse number 1 than Onana and a worse number 2 than Bayindir. We saw last season that neither could be relied upon. So he didn't have really much of a choice. I mean, obviously Tom Heaton has played in pre-season, but Tom Heaton if he's not 40, he's nearly 40. So he didn't have much of a choice. So he could have pushed harder for a goalkeeper in the summer. We know they've been linked with Gianluigi Donnarumma and Emi Martinez. So there's obviously interest in a goalkeeper, and they haven't sorted it out yet. So he had a choice, but not much of a choice. But I agree that Onana is a better bet than Bayindir, but not by much. But I think, you know, he's been there now. Amorim's been there at United for 9 months now. He knows what happens when you lose a game at Man United. It doesn't matter if you've had a positive performance. You will focus on the reason for the defeat, and the reason for the defeat was the goalkeeper. It was just, I don't think he was fouled. I've watched the replay quite a few times now, and obviously it's Saliba and Mason Mount that are wrestling in front of him, and Bayindir just kind of almost like walks into the physical confrontation. Saliba's not really pushing Bayindir out of the way. Bayindir is just all over the place. So that's an Amorim. He picked the wrong guy, but he picked the guy that he saw last season have bad performances at Newcastle, had a bad performance at Tottenham in the Carabao Cup. Yes, he played well in the FA Cup tie against Arsenal, but the reason why he's remembered is because he saved a couple of penalties, which, you know, any goalkeeper can save in a penalty shootout. So it's a tricky one, but I think ultimately Amorim should have pushed harder to get a goalkeeper in, a proper goalkeeper this summer, because you think about the successful teams in recent years. Jurgen Klopp pretty quickly got rid of Karius at Liverpool, brought in Alisson, transformative. Mikel Arteta realised that Leno wasn't the guy, brought in Ramsdale, realised he wasn't the guy, brought in David Raya, transformed Arsenal. And look at Pep, you know, he got rid of Joe Hart, brought in Claudio Bravo, who was a disaster, and quickly remedied it by signing Ederson. You need a proper goalkeeper. And Amorim probably knows that if he spends the season with Onana and Bayindir as his goalkeepers, United are going to struggle again.
Well, Rob, the obvious question then is, where are they with their search? I mean, we know they made the inquiry about Emi Martinez earlier in the window. There seems to have been a sort of cooling of the apparent interest in Donnarumma. Is that right? I mean, where are they at the moment with those two, and maybe a fresh target we don't know about yet?
Yeah, I mean, the situation with the goalkeepers now reminds me an awful lot of what happened when Ten Hag came in. When Ten Hag came in 2022, he identified very quickly that he thought he needed a new goalkeeper. And obviously David De Gea was the number one, but Ten Hag decided that he probably wasn't the guy and they needed a new keeper. Obviously, in that summer, as every summer, he had to work towards a budget. And instead of investing in a new goalkeeper, they decided to sign Anthony Casemiro, Martinez, Tyrell Malacia, because Ten Hag eventually decided that the other areas of the squad needed strengthened. He felt that he could live with De Gea for at least one more year, and hopefully De Gea gets up to speed with some coaching, and if not, they address it later down the line. Obviously, he didn't think De Gea got to that point where they could continue with him, and in the end, a year later, they signed Andre Onana. It feels very much like we're in the same situation, that Ruben Amorim knows that he needs to make an awful lot of changes to this squad. But this summer, he's decided that he wants to fix the attack and the lack of goals by bringing in Mbeumo, Cunha and Sesko. They still probably need a midfielder and they still need a goalkeeper, but they've obviously prioritised bringing in more goals and then look to address the other options. Now, I think there's a similar situation that Amorim will probably think that if they can't sign another goalkeeper in the last couple of weeks of the window because of the budget restrictions, that they'll probably do it in a year's time. Maybe United get rid of the players they don't want, the likes of Sancho, Garnacho, Anthony, possibly Højlund. Maybe they bring in enough money to go and sign a keeper. It's clear that they do think that they need a keeper, because United aren't knocking down the suggestion that they went to Aston Villa earlier in the summer and asked for Emi Martinez on loan, but just got told no by Aston Villa. They've cooled the links with Donnarumma. That they have gone to Donnarumma's camp and tried to explore what kind of financial conditions would be necessary to make that deal happen, but have just decided that it's not for them. At the moment, it looks more likely, if he is going to move to the Premier League, that it's going to be Man City or Chelsea. So I wouldn't rule out Man United signing another keeper, although Amorim told us both in that presser yesterday that he was happy with the three keepers he has. I wouldn't rule out them doing some kind of business if they can make it work within the budget, but that would mean getting someone to come in and make an offer, a substantial offer for Andre Onana to get him off the books, and also finding a keeper who they like, who they think can fit the way that Amorim wants to play. All of those things at the moment are up in the air. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Andre Onana stays and is Man United's number one for the entirety of this season.
It feels like this is going to become like Arsenal in the centre forward narrative all the way through. Man United in the goalkeeper, but we know that Arsenal have got a centre forward. Viktor Gyökeres made his Premier League debut yesterday. I must admit, I was watching at home on the TV, and I was surprised by how unconvincing he was. He looked out of shape to me, and obviously he's not had a full pre-season training. We have to give him that benefit. He had a difficult summer with Sporting Lisbon, but he just didn't look ready for the Premier League. So one game in, I know we're not going to start writing people off, but James, do you think that there's more to go with Gyökeres? Are you surprised you saw him on tour in the Far East? What are we waiting for there?
Yeah, so there's been a sort of, I think there's a slight difference between what Arsenal and Arteta would have you believe about Gyökeres and just what those of us who were on tour in particular sort of saw with our own eyes, really. And that's that, just leaving aside how good he is as a player for a minute, we've just got a sort of sense that I think I wouldn't say rabbit in headlights, but I think he's been a little bit surprised perhaps by the spotlight and the scrutiny. And he was kind of thrown into the deep end a little bit. He was obviously sat waiting for a while at Sporting, wasn't sure whether the deal was going to go through. I think the club thought at one stage that they'd have him for the start of the tour to Singapore and Hong Kong. They didn't have him when they left. There was then a sort of week or so of, will they sign him, won't they sign him? And then he flew to Singapore. I mean, this was a slightly sort of strange thing I thought at the time, really, is that they flew him into Singapore. So he came out and he sort of gave his big hello to the crowd before the Newcastle game in Singapore. And then they had one day sort of recovery day in Singapore, and then they flew to Hong Kong. You sort of think, well, did he really need to come out straight away and do that and be thrown in for that one session to then go to Hong Kong, and then Hong Kong 4 days, very intense. They had the one game, obviously the derby match against Tottenham. He played a little bit of that game, but he just, and we had some time with him at the team hotel, and he was struggling to get up to speed. You could tell that. And I had a lot of sympathy for him because, as I say, he was thrown in sort of into the middle of that tour, made that long, I think it's a 14-hour flight to Singapore, was there for, 36 hours, and then got on a plane, 4-hour flight to Hong Kong, 4 days there. As I say, we were at the team hotel for a while, and there were fans everywhere, kind of really scrambling to just get a glimpse or a selfie or an autograph with anyone they could find in an Arsenal shirt. And then, of course, they flew all the way back, and they had the 2 games, and they've gone into the season. So, I think he needs some time, definitely. And he did look a bit off the pace, and he didn't have a shot, which I was told by our stats team is the first time in more than 2 years that he's not had a shot in a league game. And he came off on the hour mark, looked as if he'd sort of run his race a little bit. So there's a long way to go with him. And also what I would say is that Arsenal have got to adapt, and they are planning to adapt their style to be a bit more direct, to try and get Gyökeres into the positions where he's strongest, which is running in behind, occupying the 2 centre halves. And Arsenal as a team didn't really get going on Sunday. They never really sort of got into their stride at any stage, really. And actually, when you could say it's a credit to Gyökeres to some extent that when he went off, their attacking threat was completely non-existent for the rest of the game. So, we can't judge him on one game, but hopefully that gives a bit of context in terms of just the behind-the-scenes stuff that he's had to deal with. And I think that's probably had an effect in not being able to hit the ground running so far.
James, I know that you weren't particularly impressed with Arsenal yesterday, as a lot of people have kind of said. That they had Gyökeres playing and Zubimendi, their 2 kind of main summer signings starting. Are you expecting there to be any more movement in or out at the Emirates before the transfer deadline? Is there any other areas of the squad that you think that Arteta is looking at and think I could maybe do with an upgrade there?
Yeah, yes. So there will be outgoings. There are a number of players who are available effectively. Leandro Trossard, Alexander Zinchenko, Fabio Vieira, to name 3. And I think if they can get Reece Nelson's probably another one. If they can get one or more of those out, then I think they could do another one in. They like Eberechi Eze at Palace, but from what I'm hearing on that one, it sounds as though Tottenham are ahead of them now in that conversation. Whether either club can convince Palace to sell is another matter, but it sounds from what I was told over the weekend that Spurs are now leading that race to sign Eze. So it's a difficult position that for Arsenal, because of course if they try and go again in the market and they go for Eze and they can't get 2 or probably 3 players they need to get out, maybe in that instance, then the squad suddenly looks bloated, and Arteta's worked so hard to get this sort of culture of togetherness and this spirit where everyone's involved. That becomes quite difficult to manage then when you've got sort of 2 or 3 players, maybe 4 players who sort of know that their numbers up, but they can't now go anywhere until January. So that's sort of where they are on the transfer front.
Rob, similar question to you. So far United's outgoings has resulted in a big fat 0 in terms of money brought in. Obviously Marcus Rashford has gone to Barcelona on loan, but it's not helped them with their ins and outs. So we know that Jadon Sancho's been interested in Roma, but he appears to turn that move down, which was a blow to United in terms of money coming in. Antony's still there. Tyrone Malacia's still there. Alejandro Garnacho, despite Chelsea's interest, is still there. Rasmus Højlund, who could get a move to Milan, but again, they don't want to pay what United want. So United needs to get players out before the deadline. We've got 2 weeks to go. Are they going to do it? Are they going to start dropping their fees? Or are they going to stick to what they want and be stuck with players until January that don't want to play?
And this is the problem, that there are obviously 2 areas of the squad that United probably do need to strengthen: the centre of midfield and a goalkeeper. But to do that, they're going to have to bring in money from those players you just mentioned. The issue with how United have handled this is that every club in the world knows that United don't want those players. Now, on one side of the coin, Amrin will say, well, not having Garnacho and Antony and Sancho and all those players on the tour of the US helped create a better bond with the squad that I do want. It helped improve team spirit. I was able to kind of create this kind of group culture while we were away, and it helped on that side of things. the flip side is that when they're all training away and every club knows that they're just not wanted, that there's no incentive for any club in the world to make any kind of realistic offers for these players because they know that United are desperate to get rid. So Chelsea and Garnacho, for example, everyone will know that Chelsea are interested in Garnacho and that Garnacho would prefer to go to Chelsea because he wants to stay in the Premier League. But United are asking of a fee of around about sort of 40 or 50 million pounds. Well, why are Chelsea going to come in and say, right, we're going to give you 40 million pounds for him when they know they could probably just sit there until deadline day and play on United's desperation and on deadline day say, tell you what, we'll give you 15 million to take him off your hands. How's that? And United then are going to have to make a really, really tough decision because Alejandro Garnacho, whether you like him or not, is not a 15 million pound player. But it's whether United can risk having him being there on September the 2nd, the day after the deadline, and carrying on this kind of saga into January and possibly into next summer. It's a really, really difficult position for United to deal with because obviously they want these players out as quickly as possible. They want any fees that they get in the bank because they want to reinvest in other areas of the squad. Everyone will know that they were looking at Carlos Balibra at Brighton, although that deal they think is out of reach for them this summer. They need money in to be able to reinvest in other areas of the squad. But as things stand right now, the clubs who are interested in the players that they don't want are just going to sit and wait to the last minute and hope that United drop their fees and drop the demands. And maybe on deadline day, they can get a bargain. I don't really know how United solve that issue because they've made it so clear that Amrin doesn't want these players and they're not going to get back into the squad or anywhere near the squad until at least after the deadline. So for the next 2 weeks, basically everyone's just kind of treading water. And this is exactly what happened with Jadon Sancho this time last year. Everyone knew that Jadon Sancho was surplus requirements, and it wasn't until deadline day, I think, that Chelsea came in and took him on loan right at the last minute. And right now, that is what United are facing for Anthony, Malacia, Garnacho and Sancho again.
Well, Manchester United, like everybody else, of course, chasing Liverpool, last season's Premier League champions. They kicked off with an impressive win over Bournemouth. I think we should just say, I thought Semenyo, the way he dealt with the racist abuse, and actually his public statement afterwards, it's just an internal credit to him and the character that he showed. And let's hope that the strongest possible punishment is given to the fan in question. But if we can leave that aside, Mark, and just talk about the game, I mean, did Liverpool impress you, or did they concern you with the way that they defended?
I think the latter. I think they set a high bar, so we have to judge them to a high bar. And I think obviously we know they're going to score goals going forward, but they were really kind of loose in midfield. And I think the problem that Arne Slot's going to have this year is how he can accommodate all the signings he brought in up front and how he kind of works out what to do in midfield, because Alexis McAllister was basically holding midfield on his own because he was playing alongside Dominik Szoboszlai, who his natural instinct is to attack. And obviously, after about 10 minutes, Szoboszlai was doing just that. So Liverpool had basically a front five. They had four at the back. They had McAllister holding the fort in midfield, and everybody else was running all over the place. Now, that was down to Ryan Gravenberch being suspended. Now, I'd imagine that Gravenberch was back into midfield alongside McAllister. That's the obvious thing to do, but I just wonder with so many attacking players to fit in whether Slot will do that and whether he will try and find a way to make it work when it might not work. I think obviously defensively they look a little bit suspect. I think we know that Canate had a poor game. Van Dijk was poor at the back as well. Now Liverpool have brought in Giovanni Leone from Parma, but he's only 18 years old. So there's a weakness in the defensive position for Liverpool. But the flip side is they're so devastating going forward that virtually every game they will score more than the opposition. But against the Arsenals, Man Cities, Chelseas, and perhaps the better teams at the top, that might not be enough. That might be the crucial element in Liverpool's game that makes them beatable this season, the fact that they can't quite control the games as they did last season. So I think what happens with Gravenberch is a big thing. It's the obvious solution, but like I say, they've got so many players in an attacking sense. They still want Alexander Isak, and if they bring Isak in, I just don't know where everybody plays. You look at Ekitike started fantastic. Mo Salah's got to play. If Isak comes in, that's the front three sorted. But what about everybody else? They've got a lot of options, and a lot of these players, need to play. Florian Wirtz. I didn't even mention Florian Wirtz, who's £160 million, and he didn't quite stand out. So they just got to get the balance right. But they scored 4 goals. Semenyo was fantastic. Scored 2 great goals, but Liverpool still fought back and won the game, and that's what they'll do. But there will be occasions when that isn't enough, and I think that will give hope to the Arsenals and Man Cities that they can actually overhaul Liverpool this season.
Well, you mentioned Man City, Rob. I mean, they were probably the most impressive team of anybody who's played so far. I mean, it's a big question after one game, but have we underestimated City a little bit? I mean, they looked pretty slick, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Really, really impressive. I think we said on the pod last week that, after what happened to them last season, and they've kind of a little bit of a disjointed summer with being at the Club World Cup, that no one really knew what to expect. Well, I know it's only one game, but they were absolutely terrific. And probably Wolves will say that it wasn't their best game, and they weren't in the form that they showed towards the back end of last season when they managed to survive relegation. I thought the one big thing that's for City was Reinders in midfield. We saw little glimpses of it at the Club World Cup. Just that willingness. It seems really simple, but that willingness to go from midfield and run beyond the striker, in this case Erling Haaland, and he just did it so many times against Wolves, and they just never picked up the run. There was one where he gets the ball from Oscar Bob and scores himself. There's another where he sets up Haaland's second goal, where he just runs beyond Wolves' defence, and it's a little cutback, and Haaland's there left with a relatively simple finish. It's something that City really, really missed last season. A lot of the attention on City's midfield was obviously around Rodri and what a massive miss he was, and obviously he is a massive miss, and City won't be properly back until he's back in a team and playing week in, week out. But they just looked so often last season like they had no energy in midfield. Everything was very sort of static. There was a lot of times where they were playing teams and they were just passing around that box and didn't really look like they were going anywhere. But they just, on Saturday at Molineux, they just seemed like they had so much more energy, and a lot of that was to do with Reinders' willingness just to run from box to box. And I've seen a lot of stuff sort of in the aftermath of that game saying that he looked like a younger version of Gundogan, and he does remind you of that in a little bit, that kind of ability to go from one penalty area to the other and not really look like he's breaking a sweat. And if he can add, I think he got 10 Serie A goals for Milan last year, and I think he was voted the best midfielder in Italy. If he can recreate those kind of numbers and get sort of 10 Premier League goals for City this year, that's a massive, massive boost and a massive upgrade on what they were able to do last season. There are obviously still issues that Pep will want to solve. There's a little bit of uncertainty at the moment around the goalkeeper. There still isn't a recognised right back in the squad. Rico Lewis played there on Saturday and did well enough, but the questions about whether he can last the entire campaign there. So there are little issues that Pep Guardiola will still want to solve. But in terms of, opening weekend and the teams that we saw, I thought that City were by far the most impressive of those teams that will think that they've got a chance of winning the title.
Well, honourable mentions, I think, for Sunderland in particular, who I thought were fantastic against West Ham and have completely vindicated my pre-season prediction that they're going to stay up. So that's all sorted. We can just tick that one off now. Anyone else, Mark, stand out for you this weekend?
Well, I also backed Sunderland to stay up, and I think on the basis of their, I think they're really well in the transfer market. The spending, they're pretty close to surpassing Nottingham Forest record. I think £142 million for a promoted team. I think they might actually break that by the time the window closes, and I think they've given it a real go. And I think the Sunderland atmosphere looked amazing at the weekend. They're a big club with a big fan base. It looks a really vibrant place to be right now. And I think, but the flip side is West Ham. I mean, I think you may also have tipped Graham Potter to be one of the first, if not the first manager to go. I know I did.
Yes.
I think that Graham Potter is not a West Ham fit. The fans aren't having him. I don't think he has the personality for the job. I don't think he's got the credentials for the job, to be honest. And I think that on Saturday looked to me like West Ham, a club that could unravel pretty quickly because they haven't made the signings they need to make. Obviously, Mikel Antonio's left because of a variety of reasons. But, prior to his accident, he was a big figure for West Ham. They lost Kudus as well. They shouldn't be losing 3-0 away to a promoted team in the first day of the season. If I'm a West Ham fan, I'm really worried. Now, I had Brentford to go down in my bottom three with Leeds and with Burnley, but I tell you what, West Ham could give them a run for the money if they don't realise pretty quickly that they've got a problem with the squad and the manager.